Hello friends, and welcome to this week's Bible study. We're studying the Gospel of Mark, and this is our 9th session. We're partly away through chapter 6, and we'll be continuing. And the first story we'll be looking at is indeed the persecution of John the Baptist by Herod Antipas. Before we actually get into the text, I thought about a bit of an introduction as to who Herod Antipas was. Well, he was one of the sons of Herod the Great, and he ruled in the regions of Galilee and Perea. He was a tetrarch, that was one of his titles, and that meant a ruler of fourth. And because when Herod the Great's empire was indeed split up, it was split into four pieces between his sons. And Antipas was the brother of Herod Archelaus. Now, Archelaus reigned over Judah from 4 BC until 6 AD, after the death of his father Herod the Great. It was Herod the Great that had ordered the death of the young boys at Bethlehem. It was said that Archelaus inherited his father's vices, but not his abilities. And Archelaus was responsible for much bloodshed in Judah and Samaria. Jewish revolts, particularly those led by zealots, were brutally crushed. His brothers, Antipas and Philip, did not approve of Archelaus' methods, so they complained to Rome. Their complaints were followed by a Jewish delegation that finally succeeded in having Archelaus stripped of power and banished by Rome to Vienne in Gaul. From that time, Roman governors ruled over Judah instead of a Herodian monarch. It is Herod Antipas that John the Baptist had rebuked. Herod's first wife was the daughter of the Nabatean king Artius IV, but Antipas divorced her to marry Herodias, the wife of his brother Herod Philip. After the death of Jesus, Antipas suffered a military defeat at the hands of Artius, the king of the Nabateans, for the treatment of his daughter. In AD 39, accusations against Antipas resulted in his exile to southern France, and Caesar gave his lands to Agrippa I. Augustus had originally appointed Herod the Great's son Philip as tetrarch over the northern part of Herod's domain, the region northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Because the population was largely non-Jewish, he was the only Herodian to mint coins with the emperor's image on them. And he built 2 cities, Panias, which he renamed Caesar of Philippi, joining the emperor's name with his own, and Bethsaida, which he named Julius in honour of Augustus' daughter Julia. A generally successful ruler, Philip was well liked by his subjects. When he died in AD 34, Tiberius annexed his territory to Syria, and in AD 37 he gave it to Agrippa I. So let's start our text. We're reading verses 14 to 16 of Mark 6. Now Herod heard of him, for his name, this is about Jesus, for his name had become well known, and he said, John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. Others said, it is Elijah, and others, it is one of the prophets, or like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard it, he said, this is John whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead. Perhaps Herod's illogical theory helped ease his guilty conscience. He could falsely console himself that he had been responsible for promoting John into some sort of miraculous ministry. John had outspokenly condemned sin in Jewish society, but when his rants were directed directly at Herod, John had to be silent. And I have a quote here from the Believer's Bible commentary, and the author there says, the ungodly like religion in the same way that they like their lions, either dead or behind bars. They fear religion when it breaks loose and begins to challenge their consciences. Later, we will read that Herod wants to kill Jesus, and then later again at Jesus' trials, Herod made sport of him. Now, let's read about the death of John the Baptist. Mark chapter 6, verses 17 to 20. For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John, and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Because John said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he had heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. So Herod feared and respected John, but he wouldn't pay the cost of repenting and living a righteous life. The king enjoyed listening to the prophet and would perform some good works, but his attempts at living a double standard life were futile. Verses 21 to 29. Then an opportune day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you." He also swore to her, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." So she went and said to her mother, "What shall I ask?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." Immediately she came in with haste to the king and asked, saying, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on the platter." The king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of his oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. Herodias' daughter was not a young girl dancing in an innocent fashion. She was a flirtatious young woman who inflamed Herod's lusts. In his state of heady euphoria, he makes an impetuous promise. Drunken parties have got other leaders in trouble, for example Belshazzar. Herodias seized the opportunity to take her vengeance upon John. The king did not want to lose face, therefore John would have to lose his head. It seems a sad and sordid ending to a great ministry, but we must not forget that the sovereignty of God in all of this. John's mission had been completed, just as he had said. He had decreased while Jesus increased. John never became a disciple of Jesus and had not been called to do so. Perhaps to those around, a clear master-disciple role would not have been clearly seen. Whatever God's reason, John's life was now over, and he had purchased a great eternal inheritance. Moving on to the return of the 12 disciples whom had been sent out in our last session. Mark chapter 6 verse 30 to 33. Then the disciples gathered to Jesus and told him all things, what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while." And there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. It appears that Jesus was planning to have some time alone with his disciples to review their ministry activities. I'm sure they would have been excited and were looking forward to relating what they had seen and done. However, these plans were squashed by the uninvited crowds that appeared. Instead of being agitated, Jesus had compassion upon them. Verses 35 to 44. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that they may go to the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave it to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. As the day had worn on, the disciples saw that the people had a need, and doubtless they had the same need. So they suggested that Jesus should send the people away so their need could be met. The Believer's Bible Commentary makes the following poignant comment: "In matters concerning ourselves, we say, like Peter, 'Command me to come to you.' But how easy it is to say concerning others, 'Send them away.'" But Jesus tells the disciples that they were the answer to the people's needs. Mark and John record the disciples' horror at being told that they would meet the need. They were thinking in terms of money, and Jesus' request seemed unreasonable. "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish unless we go and buy food for all these people." That was the wrong answer. They had 5 loaves, 2 fish, and Jesus. The answer is not elsewhere, and the answer is a life fully surrendered to God, dedicated to his service. Afterwards, the disciples had more than they had started with. To all these Jewish people, the significance of this miracle would not have been lost. God, through Moses, had provided their forefathers bread to eat in the wilderness during the Exodus. Here Jesus shows that he can match Moses' authority. The lesson for all of Jesus' disciples is that he is never restricted by our circumstance. He can provide and meet even the most unreasonable need if we can sacrifice the little we have and have faith in him. Being a follower of Jesus can be very exciting at times, but other times God asks you to pick the scraps up off the floor. Mark chapter 6 verses 45 to 52. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the 4th watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marvelled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. This had been a long, exhausting day for the disciples. I wonder how their tempers were running as they battled against the headwind. The 4th watch was between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. When the disciples cried out, Jesus immediately combated their fear. When Jesus climbed into the boat, the wind that had been preventing progress immediately ceased. Jesus walking on the water and the wind suddenly stopping filled the disciples' hearts with amazement. Mark points out that they were incapable of truly understanding what was going on or who Jesus is, because their hearts remained hardened. John, in his account, adds that when Jesus entered the boat, they were immediately at the shore where they were heading. Matthew records that Peter demonstrated a different spirit to the rest of the disciples. When he sees Jesus walking on the water, he wants to join him. And then we turn to Mark 6 verses 53 to 56. When they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through the whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made well. The town of Gennesaret was on the west shore of the Lake Galilee. The town was a fortified city in the tribal region of Naphtali, and is in the Commonwealth referred to as Chennereth. Jesus' renown for healing people meant that every town responded by laying the sick in the marketplace for Jesus to heal them. The touching of the hem of Jesus' garment, first employed by the woman in chapter 5, has become a commonplace method of receiving healing. And that brings us to the end of chapter 6, a chapter indeed which has shown that Jesus demonstrated his great and almighty power in bringing healing and deliverance and blessing, because he is the source of all of those things. And like the disciples, may we be able to have freedom in faith to sacrifice the little bit we have to release God's best upon ourselves and upon others. In Jesus' precious name, amen.